Welcome back to Filling in the History. It is another rousing episode of church history. I hope that our last episode, which was on what was called a vision, was satisfactory and to your liking, but we're glad you're back. I am the amateur historian, and today we're going to be talking about a couple of practical things. We got a couple of mission calls coming up, as well as it's a very interesting, just an explanation of the book of Revelation. So there's a section 77 we're going to be going over today. And I'm going to go over a lot of what the questions are. But again, this is not really a doctrinal episode, so I would commend you to go read it. These sections are not very long, but that's what we're going to be talking about today. So some practical stuff, some explanations of the book of Revelation from the New Testament. And hopefully this is just blowing skirts up all over the place. Hopefully you guys are liking this. So jumping right into this, part one is going to be on Doctrine and Covenant section 78, and things are very out of order here, so again, my apologies. We're actually going to be going from section 77 through section 80, but we're going to start with section 78 because section 77 actually comes very last in this episode, just following what the Joseph Smith Papers has given to us. So it actually comes after section 81, which is going to be our next episode. So the order for today is we're going to start with section 78, and then according to the Joseph Smith Papers, the chronology is section 80. And then we have this note, and then we have section 79, and then 77. So we're a little out of order, so hopefully forget that. The first copy of section 78 that we found is actually in the same stack of papers that we get from a letter sent to Newell K. Whitney. This is the papers that were eventually donated through the Isaac Grew family, but it's in the same stack as we had. So if you remember, like section 71 through 75, most of those were in a stack of papers that were folded up and that were in the possession of Newell K. Whitney for a long time. So the handwriting of this is actually Frederick G. Williams. And we have very few corrections in the text. They are very, very clean pages, which indicates to most historians that this is not the original copy. So we probably don't have the original anymore, and so this is the best that we can do. After this, we also find a copy in Revelation Book 2, which is also the handwriting of Frederick G. Williams. And so the idea is that these two things may have been recorded at the same time. And so that's why it's Freddie's helping us out over here. We do get some corrections in the hand of Joseph Smith. In fact, all of the corrections are in Joseph Smith's own hand. So the first one is, the statement is, I give unto you to prepare and organize yourselves by, and then Joseph Smith adds, a bond or an everlasting covenant. So instead of just saying by an everlasting covenant, it also says by a bond or an everlasting covenant, which kind of implies to me, I don't know if this is true for everybody, that you could just do this legally if you wanted to. You could do this on a spiritual level by an everlasting covenant, but we could also do this according to the laws of the land. It's kind of what it says to me, but that's just my opinion because I am the amateur historian. Anyway, so another one that is included here is my providences, instead of the providences of your father. So it's a little bit more in a first person. The last one that we get is the things of this world, and then Joseph adds, shall be added unto him, even an hundredfold, yea, more. And I will tell you that just personally, and I think for a lot of people, the idea that whatever you sacrifice, that you'll get the things of this world added to you, and also the spiritual things. This is, I'm just going to sidebar this for a second and say that this is one of the things that it is an interesting misinterpretation of the rich young ruler scripture in the New Testament. So you get the rich young ruler, he shows up, and he says, I've done all these good things in my life, and I've kept the commandments. And so, and Jesus kind of asks him, he's like, have you kept the commandments? Have you done all that? He's like, yeah, I've done all this from my youth up. Like, what do I lack? And he says, sell what you have, give to the poor, and come and follow me. And then we cut the story off there, but the chapter continues where the other apostles are like, whoa, dude, like you didn't ask us to do that. Are you serious? And so there's this implication that this rich young ruler was perhaps going to be called to be an apostle. We don't know because that never happened because he went away sorrowing. But what's interesting is after that, it says, he's like, yeah, it's easier for a rich man to get through the eye of a needle, for a camel to get through the eye of a needle than a rich man to get in heaven. But what he says is he's like, he will have the riches of this world and the riches of the next. So it's kind of this idea, in my opinion, of like, if the rich guy really would have just kind of stuck around, he would have seen like, yeah, I want you to do this, but you don't understand that you're going to get the things of this world added unto you 100-fold, yea, more, right? And so the fact that this is in two different places in the New Testament and in the Doctrine and Covenants is a very important doctrinal conciliation or a motivation or even an explanation of what sacrifice does for faithful Latter-day Saints. So a very important scripture, and I think very appropriate that Joseph Smith himself actually added this because Joseph, because of all the moving around and the reversals and the setbacks, never really got to see the wealth that he had. If it wasn't for that, a lot of people believe that he would have probably been a very wealthy man. But of course, things didn't happen that way. And then we also get section 78 here written in an unknown hand. And we're going to see that a lot in Revelation book 2. We don't know whose handwriting this is. It could have been much later. We also get a copy in Revelation book 1. So this is the handwriting of John Whitmer. We get some corrections and bracket marks here, which is interesting, by W.W. Phelps. The corrections are mostly to protect the names of Joseph, Sidney, and Newell K. Whitney. So this is a very interesting thing, to protect these men and to perhaps even to protect what was called the United Order, or what they called the United Firm. They would use code names. And so in the original Doctrine and Covenants, you do not see Joseph Smith's name or Sidney Rigdon or Newell K. Whitney. What you do see is, and as you can see here in W.W. Phelps' handwriting, Joseph Smith was either going to be codenamed Gazalim or Gazalam or Enoch. So those two names. Sidney Rigdon was going to be called Pelagoram, and Whitney is Ahajda or Ahazda. I don't know. Those, and who knows what those are. So what are these names? Where did we get these from? Well, there is a document. There's an essay that was written for the Joseph Smith papers called Substitute Words in the 1835 and 1844 editions of the Doctrine and Covenants. So this is an essay, and it even has a table of name substitutions that offers no explanations of the names that were used. There's also a BYU link on the Joseph Smith papers website that doesn't work anymore. So I had to do a little bit of searching because it doesn't say who these people are. So I went outside of the Joseph Smith papers to do this one, so my apologies. But Enoch, I think, is pretty obvious. This is an antediluvian prophet and seer from Genesis and what we would now call Moses. I believe Moses chapter 7 is one of the main chapters for him, just off the top of my head. But Enoch was probably the first recorded, if you are to believe in, the Old Testament revisions, he would be the very first person in history that is called a seer and a wild man at the same time. Moses, who was sort of recounting this according to, again, the scriptural history, was also termed a seer, but Enoch predates that. So Enoch, maybe that's an obvious, nickname, code name. Gazalam or Gazaline, whichever way you want to say it, is actually a mention by Alma the Younger in the Book of Alma in the Book of Mormon. So this is Alma 37:23, which says, "And the Lord said, I will prepare unto my servant Gazalin a stone which shall shine forth in darkness unto light, that I may discover unto my people who serve me, that I may discover unto them the works of their brethren, yea, their secret works, their works of darkness, and their wickedness and abominations." So a theory holds that Gazalim was a Nephite seer that used the same seer stones that Joseph Smith eventually used to translate the Book of Mormon. And so there is the theory goes that there is a Urim and Thummim with the Levites. So this is Aaron and his sons in sort of the old world, if you will. And then we have the brother of Jared, who walks off the mountain, Mount Zerin, I think it was, an exceedingly high place. And he walks down with some seer stones, a Urim and Thummim, two individual stones that you could look through. And then there's this gasoline that shows up as Nephite seer stones. And that was reportedly or theoretically passed down through to Moroni, who gave them to Joseph Smith to translate the Book of Mormon. So that's one, is that this is a person. The other theory is that Gazelem is a word or a title for a seer in a Nephite civilization. So anybody who, instead of using the word seer, or if they were using that, they would use the term Gazelem. So you could say that, King Benjamin and so forth and so on, all these individuals were actually Gazelem. That was just their word for it. So kind of cool. Makes sense for the prophet Joseph Smith. So then I look up Pelegorem. Nothing. I mean nothing. I looked at Wikipedia. I looked all over the place. There is nothing for this name. I don't know where it is. So forgive me if I just didn't do my research very well, but it is definitely nowhere in the Joseph Smith papers. And I did some searching. And for Ahajda, there is also nothing. So these might have just been gobbledygook words that they made up, or I don't know what it is, but it's definitely not scriptural. And it's not in the Joseph Smith papers. So very strange. I thought that was weird. And then you get some brackets. And what these brackets just indicate, hey, we're going to change this text in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. And this winds up being section 75 in the 1835 Doctrine and Covenants. Now, I'm not going to go into all the nitty-gritty details of where those changed. Those will come as we do introductions and content footnotes. But it was just kind of indicating, hey, we're going to make some grammatical changes to this. And that's out of Revelation Book 1. So the original copies that we get are a little bit more accurate to it. So, but that's the differences between Revelation Book 1 and what you read. There's also a copy of this in the manuscript history of the church. And we get some changes in the current section headings. And again, I mention this just because the Joseph Smith papers had a very significant impact on modern scripture in the explanations of Doctrine and Covenant sections. So from 1981, it used to read, Revelation given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Hiram, Ohio, March 1832. The order given of the Lord to Joseph Smith for the purpose of establishing a storehouse for the poor. This history of the church reference. It was not always desirable that the identity of the individuals whom the Lord addressed in the revelations should be known by the world. Hence, in the publication of this and some subsequent revelations, the brethren were referred to by other than their own names. When the necessity had passed for keeping the names of the individuals unknown, their real names were thereafter given in brackets. Since there exists no vital need today to continue the code names, the real names only are used herein, as given in the original manuscripts. So that's 1981. 2013 changes it. It says this, Revelation given through Joseph Smith the prophet at Kirtland, Ohio, different place, March 1st, 1832, different date. On that day, the prophet and other leaders had assembled to discuss church business. This revelation originally instructed the prophet, Sidney Rigdon, and Newell K. Whitney to travel to Missouri and organize the church's mercantile and publishing endeavors by creating a firm that would oversee these efforts, generating funds for the establishment of Zion and for the benefit of the poor. This firm, known as the United Firm, was organized in April 1832 and disbanded in 1834. See section 82, which will be our next episode. Sometime after its dissolution, under the direction of Joseph Smith, the phrase, quote, the affairs of the storehouse for the poor, replaced, quote, mercantile and publishing establishments in the Revelation, and the word order replaced the word firm. So in your modern scriptures, you're not going to be talking about code names anymore, which I find interesting. What we are going to talk about is, again, in those brackets, what was changed, and it is storehouses and publishing establishments and all those word replacements. So it's interesting. In 1981, we focused a lot on the secrecy of keeping code names instead of people. And in 2013, it changed to a lot more about the bracket changes from Revelation Book 1 that we just discussed. So, what are you focusing on? We fill in the history here. So you get both. Aren't you so lucky? Anyway, so let's talk about the circumstances surrounding Section 78. The original of this, which is the stack of letters, we get simply Kirtland, March 1st, 1832, as well as if you flip it over in graphite, or what we would call pencil today, it says, a command relative to Newell, Joseph, and Sidney's going to Zion, 1st March 1832, written in graphite on the back of the letter. So basically going to Zion, and they give that date. So apparently this paper maybe wasn't available to those who did the 1981 version of the Doctrine and Covenants. So that's why we changed it. Revelation Book 2 gives the exact same thing. So the index to Revelation Book 2 gives a little bit more. It says, a revelation given to Sidney, Joseph, and Newell to go and sit in council with the elders in Zion, March 1st, 1832. So just a teeny bit more. Revelation Book 1 gives the same thing. Doctrine and Covenants gives revelation given March 1832, the order given of the Lord to Enoch for the purpose of establishing the poor. Now, Enoch, as we know, is actually Joseph Smith. But in the original Doctrine and Covenants, the order was given to Enoch, which everybody kind of secretly knew was actually Joseph Smith. Manuscript history is pretty brief. In fact, most of the manuscript history introductions for this episode are very brief, which is kind of rare. It says, previous to the 20th of March, I received the 4 following revelations. Besides the work of translating, revelation given March 1832. The order given of the Lord to Enoch for the purpose of establishing the poor. There you go. So, historical introduction to this from Documents Volume 2 of the Joseph Smith Papers says, this revelation deals with the church's mercantile and publishing endeavors. As church members gathered to Jackson County, Missouri in 1831 to establish Zion, the need for money to purchase land became pressing. In July 1831, a revelation instructed Sidney Gilbert, who was a partner with Newell K. Whitney in N.K. Whitney & Co., which is the name of the store, to establish a store in Independence, Jackson County, so that the church could, quote, receive, quote, money to buy lands for the good of the saints, unquote. Gilbert opened a store in Missouri in early 1832 that was funded in part by Whitney and operated under the name Gilbert & Whitney. Whitney remained in Kirtland, Ohio to run his own store, which had been in existence since at least 1824. So this is 8 years previous. Received direction in 1831 to provide funding for the establishment of Zion. So you take the same store and you change its purpose. You're now funding Zionistic things, and this whole, I should say Zionistic, that has a different connotation today, but the idea of establishing things for the church. So the funds went to a different location. I don't know if you could do that today. I think tax law would beat you up pretty bad for going from a for-profit, sole proprietorship to like, oh, we're giving this to the poor. Maybe I'm wrong, but what do I know? Amateur businessman as well. All right, so further on in the historical introduction, on March 1st, 1832, Joseph Smith, who was in Kirtland on a short visit, assembled a group of high priests, presumably to discuss the coordination of the church's publication and mercantile endeavors. At the meeting, Joseph Smith dictated this revelation, which instructed himself, Rigdon, and Whitney to organize a firm to manage the literary and mercantile establishments of the church. The revelation also required Joseph Smith, Rigdon, and Whitney to travel to Zion and sit in council with the church there, and emphasize the need for church members to be equal in temporal things in order for unity to prevail in spiritual matters. And I would say that this is still a thing today, that, even though it's tithing and fast offerings and the dedication of time to callings, it's definitely this idea that if we're not united, it's not going to work spiritually. So a very practical idea that is still held today. So how about a little content, some footnotes that we get from Documents Volume 2 of the Joseph Smith Papers. Further into the text we get, in fact, at the beginning of it, the very start of this revelation, it says, "Hearken unto me, saith the Lord your God, O ye who are ordained unto the high priesthood of my church, who have assembled yourselves together, and listen to the counsel of him who has ordained you from on high." So, very first footnote we get here says, these high priests were likely Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, Newell K. Whitney, Reynolds K. Hoon, Joseph Coe, and Hiram Smith. Hiram Smith recorded in his diary that these individuals met in Kirtland, Ohio on March 1st. The diary reports that Father Coe was there, probably in reference to Joseph Coe. Smith and K. Hoon were appointed counselors to Bishop Newell K. Whitney on 10th of February, 1832, and likely attended the meeting in that capacity. So that's who was actually there. We don't really get any indication of that elsewhere. So Thanks for keeping your diaries. Once again, you got to keep your journals. So that's who is in the room. Further in, we get in the text, I give unto you whereby you may accomplish the commandments which were given to you, that through the providence of your Father, notwithstanding the tribulation which shall descend upon you, you may stand independent above all other creatures beneath this celestial world, that you may come up unto the crown prepared for you, and be made rulers over many kingdoms. Footnote 6 to this says, Webster's 1828 dictionary defines creature as, quote, that which is created, every being besides the creator, or everything not self-existent, the sun, moon, and stars, the earth, animals, plants, light, darkness, air, water, etc., are all creatures of God, unquote. So a very different, I don't know if anybody else feels that way, but that was a very different definition of the word creature. Basically, any created thing by God, except for God himself, is a creature. So plants, darkness, air, the sun, insects, creatures. I thought was very interesting. So when you're singing all creatures of our God and King, you should probably change your mind a little bit if we're talking about Webster's dictionary. So what's the aftermath of this revelation? Well, we get this from the historical introduction. Money was also needed to fund the publication of Joseph Smith's Revelations, another venture church leaders began exploring in 1831. On 12th of November, 1831, a special conference in Hiram, Ohio, gave Joseph Smith, Oliver Cowdery, John Whitmer, and Sidney Rigdon the responsibility of managing the sacred writings of the church, including the Revelations. That same day, a revelation directed that Joseph Smith, Cowdery, Whitmer, Rigdon, Martin Harris, and William W. Phelps be ordained, quote, stewards over the Revelations and commandments, unquote, and that any profits they gained from publishing church materials over and above their needs be placed in the Lord's storehouse to benefit, quote, the inhabitants of Zion and their generations, unquote. So what this means is they needed to, this revelation is trying to fulfill what they were already commanded to do a couple of months previous to that they were to do it for the intent of like covering their costs and spending the money and being honest that way. And then whatever was left over, that would go on to those who needed it in Independence, Missouri. So that is part one, and a little bit about some practical matters dealing with in this section 78 that we just talked about. In our next section, we're going to be talking about two very short sections and what is simply called by the Joseph Smith Papers a note. So stay tuned for more rousing Joseph Smith Papers excitement.